Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. All right. So I've just shared in the chat here a link to the running docs. So I will create us one for today. And in the top of that doc, you will find um, a link to the sheet that we're working on and anything else, hopefully, that you need to get started here. So we'll give it another minute or two to let people stream in and then get kicked off.
I'll probably be more of a bit of a fly on the wall on this. So I'm conscious I might be coming into this kind of halfway through. So
No worries.
any kind of pre-reading things like that, I'll follow up on that afterwards.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's more than welcome, Ryan. Please don't feel like you have to stay quiet because you're a new voice. The whole idea of these calls is to get input from people about where they feel like these questions do or don't elicit useful like information about where where they would self-assess on maturity. So you have that knowledge whether or not you've been on every call or it's your first call. So yeah, just saying it, it's up to you on how much you want to participate, but don't feel like you have
Thanks.
to step too
Got it.
far back.
No worries.
I saw a few regulars on the last call that I don't see yet, and they may not be able to come today, but I'm just trying to give them one more minute to see if they show up, just because otherwise it will be a fairly new face set of calls. So might look a little bit different today. Corbin, you're our most seasoned. So one of the things, so I see some relatively new faces to the working group in the call, and if you've been only to the last call and now this one, you'll see that my role changes dramatically between the two calls. So where I was the lead on the last call, leading that call, making sure that I basically spoke far too much is the summary of that. On this call, I am really here more for support and as a participant. So my goal as like the sponsoring lead of this project is to make sure the project has the oh, someone with feedback. Make sure the project has the support it needs, has any unblockings, any of those kind of things, and continues to move forward. So I try not to be the leader on these calls, and instead just a participant and relatively quiet one if I can help it. So, Chris, Corbin, you two, David, you three are quite frequent flyers on these calls. Corbin was the original submitter of this idea and of the original like kind of draft, so that's where he comes from. And yeah, so somebody please take it away and let's get this going.
Did you really say you're relatively quiet? Come on.
I try. I'm just gonna, you know what, Chris? That's how you get a muted video off to Abby, which you're actually gonna get because I do need a 5-minute break. Because I've been on here on video since lunchtime. So I will be I will genuinely be back in 5 minutes, and I promise this is not me throwing my toys. I just need 5 minutes, so I'll be right
Does
back.
anyone remember what number we got up to last time? I think it was like number 7, number 8, something like that.
We have comments up to 6, so it'll be
So
either 7 or 8 probably.
yeah, yeah.
There. So yeah. All right, I'll be right back. I'll
Okay,
let
so we're
y'all go
jumping
to
in
it.
on operations still, the second half of operations.
Yeah, so we went through it last week, and I think we only got through 6 questions, but some really good discussions about it, Corbin. And then Turja, so I don't know if he's saying his name correctly. Yeah, he was kind of new to the group last week, added a massive amount of questions to that, and we just started to explore some of those and some of the other ones. And I know he's been doing some rearranging of the questions in the background, so we felt that we should come back to it because we still hadn't got through the guts of it. I think at that time, I think the number's reduced now. I'm just looking through the doc. Yeah, I mean, there's 19 questions, but I think some might have been deleted as well, because I'm sure we were over 20 earlier on today.
Yeah, so Chris, basically, for example, when I was that time in the last call adding those questions, right, that was more like just a mind map, right? For example, you saw 3 questions regarding support. So even I saw your comments, and even before that, I knew I had to anyhow collapse them. So right now you will see only one. So that's why the count is much less than, let's say, what it was in the first time.
Right. And I do see that you've taken the comments that we've been doing offline, because I think they were very much kind of question answer ones. Do you have this? Do you have that? And my feedback was very much, well, what we're trying to get away from is that style of question to more like, how do you do this? And try and figure out where you are on the 1 to 4 maturity model. So I see you've kind of been going through that and rewording some of the questions as well. So yeah, maybe we just start then at number 7 and just let me make my screen bigger, and I just rattle through the questions this week and see how we get on. We probably won't get finished them because there's 14 questions there to get through today, and our track record on that's pretty rubbish. We tend to get maybe 3/4 of the way through and then say, hey, that's enough, we'll move on to the next section. And I think that is the intent for this week, but let's see how we get on towards the end. We've got 40 odd minutes to go through that at the moment. So does anyone want to volunteer for taking notes? Well, that's what we normally ask each week. I'm rubbish at it because I'm dyslexic and can't talk and type and spell at the same time. So if anyone wants to,
Well, I can maybe kick in a little bit. So the first one I think is number 7. We're gonna start with that, right, Chris?
start at number 7, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I was what I was doing is trying to bring up
Hold on, did anyone commit to taking notes?
I think you did.
Uh-uh. All right, I can
right?
try. I'll try and keep up with that today. But all right.
Thanks, David.
Yeah.
I guess I was looking at number 7 and I was trying to bring up the maturity model to think about like the lowest level of operations. And I think usually it's a little bit more ad hoc. And so what I was seeing in the first sort of response is a single platform team approach, doing all engineering and support. I think there's scenarios where there is no centralized team necessarily, right? Or it might be a little bit more ad hoc than that. So I was thinking that we need probably something maybe a little bit less than, I always think about this as, do you have a dedicated team or not a dedicated team, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the questions we still haven't answered yet either, Corbin, is whether or not just 4 answers is enough, or whether for some of them we do need a 5th, like what you're talking about. Have you got that one that we all think is pretty bad that isn't even really level 1? We haven't had that conversation yet. I think that'll come through at the editing one. But yeah, I agree with you. It was me that put that question in. I was trying to use some of your original questions, so it should be familiar to you, right? Because I've tried to slip as many of those in as we could. And I was trying to get to that point, maybe it's single platform team or less, maybe ad hoc rather than them doing all the engineering support. We did have a question further up that was about the platform teams, because I remember asking that ad hoc question somewhere. Yeah, reactive based on ad hoc requests or events. I think it was question 5. But that was more about the updates. Yeah, okay. So maybe we can change number 1. What about the rest of the answers, though? Because typically what we're trying to get to was, are you a single platform team trying to do everything? Still high cognitive load on that team, high expectations. Are you moving towards kind of a more federated model? So you might have multiple platform teams, but maybe supporting their own components. Have you finally got to the stage where they're centrally orchestrated? I think that's what the model's talking about. potentially with a more complex support model wrapped around that. And then really are you getting to, I think, what we think the full nirvana is. Certainly, several of us do, maybe we need to agree on that, right? Is full inner sourcing contribution model, full federated type model of components and products and a separate support model. Do we think that's the North Star? Yeah, and that's
Yeah,
where
I think so. I agree with that. I don't know. I'm trying to differentiate between the single platform team and multiple platform teams, and then the centrally orchestrated. So it seems like there's like nuances.
there are.
We might be like splitting hairs in some cases. I feel like there.
We can reword the answers. All I was trying to get across is that most organizations will start either ad hoc or a single team. Eventually, you might get a bit of splintering goes on because you've still got the demarcation lines inside organizations where, you know, the not invented here syndrome, all these different things. You'll end up with multiple platform teams doing their own engineering and their own thing. Eventually, you start bringing those together again. You start centralizing that, is really what the maturity model talks about. And then, really, if you've got that centralization correct, people then you want people to start contributing to building the platforms. So that's when you're going for that North Star inner sourcing approach. That's certainly what a lot of us have been talking about, right?
So just one point I had here, Chris and Gorman, is that I think, I mean, whether a single platform team is doing or multi. So let's say if the first stage is single platform team approach doing all engineering. The second stage we are saying in a higher maturity is multiple platform teams. Is it really higher maturity than a single platform team is my question, right? I mean, I think the question should rather be that, I mean, do you follow these engineering practices XYZ? I think that is whether it is done by a single platform or multiple. I have seen, for example, use cases where there is a very single platform team very efficiently doing the entire end-to-end stack, right? As long as they're following the core platform principles that we are more interested. I think should that not be, for example, like you said, Chris, the inner source approach. Let's say if we say that is the final target of maturity, that is a very good, whether it's done by a single platform team centrally and then taking inner source inputs from the rest of the thing or something along those lines. So I think that could be one of the thought processes, which was something we were discussing actually in the last call with Abby as well, right? Do we really think that a multiple platform teams are more mature than a single platform team?
Yeah, I think the theme there, as I was calling out to David around notes, is like that I think we called out was that we're looking to focus on outcomes over tactics, right? And I think that's what maybe you're calling attention to there, is that like whether you have multiple teams or a single team, that's sort of a tactic. Maybe one idea, one thought of what like the outcome we're trying to think about there is like, is it a bottleneck or not? So like when I think of single versus multiple teams, I'm thinking like a single team is like you have to put your request in for something on the platform to a single location. There may be one or more teams behind that location, behind that ticketing system or whatever, but there's like a single sort of entry point of request for like, if I want something on this platform, you have to do it for me. Versus maybe what we're talking about is a separate outcome, is like that like kind of decentralized way where it's like it's a more that plug-in model, more that like
Inner source.
inner sourcing model, like all that kind of stuff. Oh, I have a whole blog I'm going to write about the word inner sourcing. I think this is just more and more fodder for that. But yes, like I think, yeah. So I think that maybe that's when. So did I hear you correctly, Terja, on like calling out that tactics versus outcomes, like wording or focus? Okay, cool. And then that's my proposal, is what I'm hearing, with a more outcome oriented read of it, maybe.
Yeah, and we can reword that first and second one. I get your point. Is maybe that's just a team shape thing, but the first one, I think what Corbin had said was, you know, is it no, we don't have a team to, it's ad hoc or it's a bit messy. I think that's really the intent we're trying to get, is the lowest maturity, right? Okay. Let's say we've done that one to death. Everyone okay with moving on?
Well, just I don't think we're addressing support particularly much, and there is an area of I don't know, earliest maturity, which is separate support team, right? It's very typical. I mean, I've been building Linux platforms, right, for a long time, and in the early 2000s, we engineered the kickstart infrastructure, and then we handed it over to other people to deploy and manage, right? So the platform is broken into like R&D and operations.
So are you saying they would potentially split that question, the engineer and the support? Because that does tie in with some of the things we've got further down, where they have been split out.
Yeah, I think it's but I think it's also important to understand, do you engineer and support separately? Because I think there are still lots of organizations doing separate R&D.
Yeah. Which gets back to that thing I was just talking about in the content. I think you might maybe dropped off in the previous call, where I was talking about those team topologies, and there's
Yep,
lots of
yep.
different shapes. Yeah. Okay. I'll put that in as a comment. I don't know how we address that.
Okay.
Maybe we split that question up. There are other ones related later that maybe come back to 7. Other than that, okay to move on to 8.
Yeah, it's no
Seeing
problem.
nodding heads. Yeah, cool. What's your approach to upgrades and environment usage?
So I made a comment on that one. I feel like it overlaps a lot with 6, which was talking about. It talks about upgrades. It talks about failures during upgrades. I think there was also number 5, which is about upgrades. So I'm just wondering, I think one of the things that we need to consider is making sure that we don't have too many questions.
Yeah.
So if we can try to figure out what do we want to learn about the capabilities of upgrades, we should try to figure out how to consolidate into something.
So this was a me one that I added in. We've not yet got to the other ones because I'm reading the answers and remembering it was me. What I was trying to get out of that was really, are you at the traditional approach where in a lot of organizations you're creating these long-lived environments that you're feeding and you're watering and you're maintaining environments. You've given them pretty names, right? Which is where a lot of people are at, and I think that's in the platform stuff we're talking about, that's probably the lowest level of maturity, right? Then we start getting them on the journey towards maybe short-term leases. So you're getting away from those always having the same ones. You're getting into that refresh. Then you're really thinking about, okay, we've moved to maybe the lower ones being that evergreen, but we haven't yet worked on how we do that in production. So we've got up the maturity tree, we've sorted out our non-prods, but we're still not there for production yet, which is I think where a lot of people will probably be in the maturity model, right? When we talk to them. And then there's really that nirvana, which I'm not sure everyone, a lot of people are at, around the evergreen or the short-term approach for production and how we deal with that day 2. I mean, it is a day 2 question, right? But it's about how you're kind of what approach you're at and where you're at on that journey. I thought that was a useful one to capture. So that's why I put it in, but I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I've definitely not seen that the highest level of maturity anywhere. But I think for me, like I really want to understand how people think about doing maintenance and if that's something that they need to like schedule and notify folks and things like that versus things are always being just updated on a regular cycle, right? Like
Right,
things are
right.
just transparent. You get into things like, even like, I don't want to get too far into things like chaos engineering or whatever, but but being able to like just like consistently make changes to things.
And there are questions later on that are about that kind
Yeah.
of what we're deeming the permission model. Are you seeking permission still, or are you doing it completely transparent? So I thought these kind of complemented each other.
Maybe the environment should be split out and we just replace that with availability. Because I think the the idea of ephemeral infrastructure is maybe a little too much of a implementation principle that doesn't work for everybody. It is sort of an ideal, but I think the more core to it is, are you providing a continuous uptime service with, transparent upgrades?
Yeah, I'm just going back to the model too. One of the biggest challenges I've had with this particular section of the doc is that I noticed in some of the other questions that we have coming up, it starts getting into some sort of infrastructure management capabilities. And um, I don't feel like the operations section really talks about how does the platform team operate versus like things like I put some comments in the next section like it talks about monitoring and logging or even upgrades in some of this environment stuff we're talking about right now where there's a whole category of things around infrastructure management like resiliency and disaster recovery and monitoring and metrics and
We got kind of caught on this. I mean,
Last week.
I did
Yeah.
my usual, like, I'm going to throw a wrench in the works because this ended up being very similar to interfaces in terms of the amount of clarity there is when the rubber hits the road in terms of actually assessing or trying to move within the model. Because I think the first thing that sort of came out of it is we say operations, and that implies to a lot of people ops as opposed to operating model, which is, the full SDLC from product inception to retirement, right? So I think, and given how broad it is, it's possible for that to be, and the fact that there's crossover with so many other sections for the operating model. Like if you take investment, that covers operating model to some degree. Like they all kind of cover operating model, but the pure operations, what is your availability and uptime of your product, your service? I feel like that's not as well covered like in other sections.
And Abby took that as feedback, right? We said that about the model last week and said when
Yep.
the revisions come through, that was definitely something that we were going to
We're
feed
gonna
back.
have a look at that. I think that the idea of adding model to the end, like operations model versus just operations, might help with that. If that's the direction we think that is more accurate to the content of the platform engineering model. I think the one thing I'll call out is like I do think there is my personal opinion is that there is a line between like database, like the capability uptime and the platform. And so this is that like sort of there's three tiers to any architecture typically, and like the platform is exposing capabilities that are going to have their own monitoring and their own like their own uptimes and all of that, observability and all that, but like the platform itself has that as well. So what I mean by that is like the Google Cloud Platform, AWS, Azure, whatever, can be up as a platform with one of its services having downtime or issues. So you might find that like trying to use RDS databases is having some issues right now with like response time, and the platform is the thing giving you visibility into the fact that one of the capabilities is like not doing great. I
Yeah,
don't know. I think it's like that line.
so this question wasn't about availability in that sense. And you kind of just
Cool.
triggered me on that one. It was about, in a lot of larger organizations, you'll get different projects they'll come along and they'll build 5 environments and they'll call it the route to live, and they'll maintain those forever, right? And that's probably the least mature and the least way we want them to be. It's really old school thinking. The most mature is evergreen, but very few people get to evergreen. And so there's those other stages in the mix, which is really starting to get people thinking about short-term leases, regular refreshes, which is getting them that evergreen capability. For a lot of orgs, they can only ever go up to non-production doing that. And it's okay for their dev environments to be kind of more, ephemeral. They're there for when they're required. A couple of weeks, they get rid of them. That's probably the most mature they're going to get. But their prod is always it's always there. It's fed and watered. And it was just trying to somehow capture that. Because, the least mature, I think, and the thing we should be calling out is that building 4 environments and maintaining them forever. It's still stuck in the old ITIL model. We're putting things in a CMDB. We've called them Fred, Billy, Bob, Jeffrey, right? And the 1980s style.
But again, so that is another reason to split availability and environment usage out into
Yeah.
separate questions.
Yeah.
And
So I
maybe
agree
just
with
the
that.
model
Put that-
itself, like the outcomes in the model itself aren't particularly clear with that.
Yeah. So I'll put that comment in. I think hopefully that's covered off that one.
So what do you guys think about, like, as I think we kind of beat that one to death a little bit, but
Mhm.
when you think about monitoring and logging, incident management, like some of these other ones, is it that we need to add that context to the maturity model, or that we don't need to measure that as part of this?
I personally think it needs to be part of the model, and there's two aspects to it. There's what does an individual team need now, whether that's the app team, the platform team. There's team level observability, and then as a wider org, when you start having these, different teams creating maybe the microservices and wiring it together as a customer journey, you've got that organizational observability as well. And to be honest, as a large org, that's exactly where we're at. We have individual teams that have got their own monitoring for their own purposes. And then we've got kind of the login forward approach, where we've got a more enterprise-wide observability capability that's much more about business services end to end, and much more about other people's usage of that data, not necessarily either the platform teams or the app teams who have got their own way of working and interacting, right? They're different usage. And having looked at a couple of other orgs and what other people have done, sometimes they get stuck on that. They may only ever have the team level view, but never the org level view. And that's where on kind of question 9 was trying to get that out and say, who's it down to implement their app and component monitoring and things like that? What have you got in place? Right the way up to it's centrally enabled, and we've got team level, org level, different lenses available for different people, a much more mature solution than maybe just what's up gold running and looking at the server uptime, right? Which I've seen some orgs do, and that's fine for platform, but it only covers a couple of parts of the app.
So I feel like this question drifts a bit away from the section itself in the model, which is about how platforms are engineered and supported. Because I think, Chris, part of what you're talking about is providing observability services and capabilities to apps, as opposed to how do you actually monitor your own platform and whether or not you're delivering on your SLAs to apps.
Right, but if you're doing platform as a product, then you've got to start monitoring those products, and so you end up getting into that, whether it's just about your platform, your products, it's part of your operating model, and you get into how that's then supported as well. Who do those alerts go to? If you've got composable products that different teams have engineered and contributed to, but they're not the ones creating the product, so that inner sourcing approach, how do you deal with the monitoring and alerting for that is really important. Where do the alerts go to? Is it the person that created that product that you're exposing to people? Is it the component teams? And that's where you kind of need to get to that really mature approach to line up with the other question we've got further up about the inner sourcing approach. That's what was meaning, David, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, like I said last week, I'm not so sold on the inner source part because I feel like that's I don't know if that is a North Star. It's a utopian ideal more than anything to me.
I think some people are doing it. Where we
3 years.
see it, where I tend to see it the most is where organizations are leveraging like a developer portal interface, and they have like different teams onboarding different types of services, and they have a central place where people can go to understand how to consume those things, whether it's like centrally documented and API driven, or directly through the UI they can consume those things. But I think there's been some talks even at KubeCon and stuff about people getting, that far along in their journey where they're actually getting different teams to contribute.
Well, so maybe I should clarify. I think there's a difference between what I know of inner source, and maybe this is something Abby's going into in her blog post, where like open source, you can offer code PRs to improve a platform, as opposed to building in an ecosystem environment of platforms that's large enough that somebody takes a raw compute and raw storage platform, which may be separate, and builds a database platform on top of that and offers that as a service. To me, that's not inner source. That's just a compositional pattern for platforms and organizations.
Read
So
my
it's a mix of
rant
both of those.
mind.
Yeah, we can have a long discussion on that one, Abby, right?
I know.
But I
I
mean,
suspected.
well, yeah, I mean, you had to suffer Rochelle today, right? So,
No
Me,
suffering.
inner source is PRs.
yeah,
And
no, it's not about inner source. I mean, in larger organizations, you've heard me talk about this before, David. Like the division I'm in, we've got a number of platform engineering type teams. We want each one of those to contribute their own component. But outside of that, we also want the business units to start contributing as well. So some of it is about the individual teams doing their own thing, and some of it in this inner sourcing model is about outside of the division doing that as well and contributing, not necessarily just PRs, but even capability as well. You know, if the business are going off and doing something that really should be exposed consistently and centrally, then get them to contribute in that
I think
model.
it needs, at that point, when you use source as part of the name, it just means something different than, whatever else we're talking about where people create capabilities, right? If you create and offer and support capabilities, that's not source, right?
Is just before I say this is clearly a getting towards the point of like a religious battle of inner sourcing and how to use the word. And I'm right there with everyone else on the religion. But I just want to make sure that it's useful for the context of operations or operational model like questions within the assessment, because I do totally think this is a valuable conversation. This is the type of conversation I'd love to have in just sort of an open forum. I just don't want to leave today feeling like operations hasn't been explored because we've been caught ourselves in a narrow hole here. Um, and you can tell me it needs to be
in
decided
terms of
today.
monitoring
So.
and logging, getting back to the actual question we're on, I think Chris's clarification that you could have, if you think of the capabilities on the platform as applications, it is somewhat fair to talk about quote unquote applications and the platform in the same breath as needing observability capabilities. And how do we in that case, is this a good enough differentiation? Being down to application component, I feel like there is a certain amount of maturity, again, not cross-referencing into the model of, are you looking at proactive versus reactive, um, monitoring and logging? That, to me, that's like, do I have SLOs, and am I looking for triggering events, and am I providing, when you talk to people about monitoring and logging, it's like, and do we need a separate alerting? Do we treat alerting as separate from that? That's my first question. And second is, I would say the different maturity levels are how proactive you are with that data.
Yeah.
So alerting, part of this, separate. It's another religious discussion. Is monitoring and alerting the same exact thing or not?
Yeah, and some places have kind of obscured all of that by just calling it observability, right? And they mean all of that. They just, yeah. Do
One
we
thing I
get into the glossary of definitions?
So again, coming to that thought process of, let's say, outcomes, maybe we could keep it a little bit more generic, because again, as I said, right, this section itself is also very, let's say, broad. We can say that, okay, does the platform provide visibility and help you understand how your application is performing? Something along those lines, right? So some platforms will provide observability as part of the platform, right? So for example, they will provide a central store, maybe provide Kibana dashboards to provide you visibility as part of the platform. Some platforms might just say, okay, I'm giving you the compute, you set up the observability on your own. So maybe that could be the question, which could be a little bit more generic. Like, I mean, does your platform provide you the
I feel like
capability?
that's the first answer, separately down to each application can implement their own, right? That's you're basically encompassing that first.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, rather than saying monitoring, alerting, kind of like making it again, because otherwise, as you said, right, we can then say, okay, do you have a central logging mechanism, right? That prunes log. I mean, there is a lot in, and there are essentially a lot of stuff that you really need to cover if you really want to cover day one, day two, basically, right?
So you're saying shorten that first one down to observability?
Something like that, yeah, right? Kind of providing insights into your platforms, right? Does the platform help you provide insights into the application and how to improve them? Something like that, maybe, I don't know, along those lines, just to make it extremely generic. If we want to keep it generic, otherwise we'll have to make it like individually a little bit more descriptive.
Also feels like maybe we are mixing application and platform now that we've had a good discussion on it. And we might want to split both of those out, right?
You
because
had me convinced the other way that the platform is an application.
So platform and platform products need that built into them, right? I'm a fundamental believer of that. That's what we're doing. But listening to Turja talk about some of the applications and teams doing it themselves, you know, some app teams will want their own alert and it goes direct to them, right? But I think we need what there doesn't seem to be a hook in the maturity model that really gets at what is mature for level 1, 2, 3, and 4 for monitoring and alerting. We're not really giving good guidance at the moment.
No, I think there are two aspects, right? So there is the platform, then there are solutions built on top of the platform, right? Which are the stream aligned teams, let's say, right? Now, as a platform, am I mature if I am monitoring my platform? Or am I mature if I help monitoring the solutions built on top of my platform? So I would take it for granted that the platform is already monitoring itself just like everything else, right? But am I able to also provide monitoring, observability, logging, whatever, right? Instrumentation as a capability to the teams who are deployed on top of me.
Yeah, and so in our org, right, and what we were doing, we were basically asked to give that centralized capability to the teams so that when they're on board and they don't need to think about it themselves.
Exactly.
They just use that. And that was seen as the most mature thing we could do.
Most mature.
Reducing, because the aim was to reduce their cognitive load, right, and stop them having to know how to engineer it. And if we think that that's the most mature thing, so the least mature is that they're all doing it themselves. They've got that high cognitive load. The most mature is the least amount of cognitive load on the app teams.
Exactly. And then the question becomes, from an outcome perspective, does the platform provide enough visibility into the solutions running on top of the platform so that it can reduce the cognitive load of individual application teams running on top of the platform, as an example, right? Then you get those 4 answers. That's what I was trying to get to, rather than, again.
Can you restate that? Because I had let me just say that for like, I think there's a 3rd and 4th level, the lowering the cognitive load of setup versus lowering the cognitive load of interpretation, right? So, you know, like if I can set it all up with just, it gets set up with my app, but it's still, you know, really raw data that I have to sort through versus predefined patterns of analysis that get applied. And when I need to, you know, it's kind of a different shades of what you're talking about, Sergio, with the, you know, do I get everything just thrown at me, or do I get something valuable sent to me?
I completely get what you're saying, David. So again, even an example is, as I said, right, one is, let's say whenever I'm setting up a Kubernetes cluster, I'm also installing a Jaeger pod just to get distributed tracing. So that's, like you said, like part of the process. It makes it like simple for me because I don't need to go and again download a Docker image and deploy it. And the second part, David, is what even we are trying a little bit at EY right now is not only to provide you a dump of all of the logs, but also to find patterns directly in the logs using AI and highlight those patterns, right? That is like even a higher level of maturity, where I'm just not helping you set up the observability as a part of the, let's say, as coming as part of the package. But now with the logs that I have and based on my experience, I'm also providing you some deeper insights saying, okay, guys, based on this pod is not doing well, that pod is doing well, you should do this in this pod. So that is like an even higher level of maturity, I agree. But I have not seen many people do that. I mean, that could be awesome.
I mean, there is a term for that in the observability world, and it's on the tip of my tongue, but it's not AI ops, but it's something like that. You know, where they're exactly as you said, it's higher level insight. Things are getting fed into the system, and it's identifying those patterns and behaviors for you to say you've got an issue here. So they don't need to know about setting that up themselves. They're getting that just by using the platform.
And
But I
you
think-
know, the most advanced, I can't find the post right now, but Netflix had this amazing visualization of observability data years ago, where it was just they took all of the traffic data and they just made it into a simple, like, I think it looked kind of like a Y or something like that. And you know, it made, you know, so it's not just analysis, it's also things like visualization and stuff like that, and standardizing. You know, it's very nice when you can have graphs of calls, but like, okay, maybe just home in on the thing that matters. So,
yeah,
so yeah, that's three. It feels like 3 and 4. The question is, maybe 2 is level 2 appropriate for not having to worry about it, in terms of maturity model, and level 1 is the level 1's ad hoc, level 2's don't need to care about it. Or is level 2 something else, and level 3 is don't need to care about it, and level 4 is, you know, uh, smarts, intelligence comes with it.
so you're suggesting those two need reworded? Okay, put that in as a comment. 2 and 3 need reworded.
Hey, look at that. We've gotten through 2 questions.
We'll go through a bit more than that. Okay, number 10. Does your platform support incident management? So that's a does question again instead of how.
Are you talking about the types of tools that are now showing up that aggregate data into an incident for an incident management team, like someone working on an incident? And then having tools like a wiki for an incident, and you know, sort of like a package to manage the data and the interactions? Or are you just talking about alerting?
I did not add this question.
Is Chris frozen or just no? You're thinking deeply. Okay.
I don't. Me.
Okay. So I feel like this
don't know.
one is not worth spending time on.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
it's too
Let me
vague.
just put.
We could probably get that info from other questions.
Exactly.
Right, I'd actually put my replies in the wrong question, so I was just putting some text there. That's okay, I'll work it out. Right, number 11 then. Is there a way for consumers of the platform to be aware of the upcoming releases, new features, etc. of the platform? For example, do you publish a roadmap for the next few quarters that can be viewed by all?
So 11, 13, 17 are all basically the same. So we can knock out 3
Merge
and 1.
11, 13, 17 together as all
True. Agree.
the same. Yeah, it's all about how you're communicating, right?
Exactly. How you communicate, how you keep people informed.
Communicating. Okay. Let's move on from that then. Let's do the ones that outside of that. So 12. How do you ensure that the platform team only builds offerings that are needed or have committed demand? So that's all your platform demand management stuff.
Again, this could be in a sense related to the first question, I think, which is on the backlog, or how do you manage? Does your platform have a structured backlog? Kind of same. See, what the question is trying to get
Structured
to is
backlog
that
could be an answer to one of these, to this type of question.
Yes, also. Actually, what I was trying to get to with this question, David, is that, I mean, do they follow a platform as a product approach on basically? I mean, that should be the question. How do I have to write the question? We have to think, but something along those lines, right? I mean, because that kind of takes care a lot of the different questions, right? I mean, if the final maturity is they treat the platform as a product, then they must have a product life cycle, they must have a product roadmap, they must have a product manager, maybe they must have a product backlog in case they're following all of the product, let's say, standard methodology. So if we could get to a question which helps us answer that, I think that could in turn help us answer another 5-6 sub questions without
So
having to specifically add them.
I think some of that was related to the investment approach as well, though. Now, I know we did say you could have the same question in multiple areas, but some of that, I thought we asked this same question under investment. Just looking to see if we did.
I'll take note of that. Actually, that's like a good example of just sort of a high level theme that's worth noting down of like, what do we do with questions that we feel like give us information for more than one section? Like we'll have to make sure we track those. So
yeah, because I mean the process side is absolutely valid, right? It's okay. There is an investment part to it about how do you fund all this sort of stuff, and what's your funding model. We covered all of that in investment, but then in terms of the process, kind of what you're getting at is, well, it's ad hoc. It's going to individuals. And that's what the maturity model talks about, right the way up to, we treat it as a product. We've got a backlog for each of the products. The products are invested. All the requests are evaluated. We do say no. So the right things are there on the 1 to 4, I think. And I get the level 4. I recognize it because I'm doing my PI planning right now. So it fits in nicely with kind of our thoughts, yeah, of where we want to be. Things like the platform team only develops something if the multiple consuming teams are asking for the same. So yeah, that's all about is there.
You're saying level 4, the fourth answer of 11? Roadmap is dynamically created.
12, I think. What am I looking at?
Oh, only builds. You got it.
Have I skipped a row? Is that my problem?
No, you're fine. I just misread where we were.
Yeah, no, I thought we were on like number 12. Yeah. Yeah, we are. Don't hear much noise about that one. So, is collective agreement on 12?
I feel like there is there's an overemphasis on scale versus maturity for this answer. Business case, like all this stuff, like I don't know that always equals maturity model.
Agree.
Most mature. Most mature does not equal large and
Where's
cumbersome.
the business case?
For me, this is around like, I guess, business value, to put it in slightly more generic terms. Like we may not necessarily have a business case, but we can identify that it's obviously it's going to be a consistent capability, for example, that will be used across multiple teams, and we can easily identify the business value resulting from this. So would that help just to soften it slightly?
Yeah, I agree. I see it now.
Yeah.
Again, sign off as well from the platform leadership team. Some places don't operate that formality, right?
No.
I mean, the product owner. So
yeah,
maybe some of the thinking about product management, product ownership needs to be inserted there. But generally, I got what it was saying.
Exactly.
Maybe the comment. I'll put a. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, exactly, David. That's what I said, right? The idea was just more to like re-emphasize at the higher end of the spectrum that there needs to be some sort of processes in place to ensure that they're treating the platform as a product, they're building stuff which are actually needed, they have a way to know what is needed, they have a way to verify that it is really needed. There are more examples, right? They should not get into the final question, to be very fair.
Yeah, okay.
And there's a proposed, just to call out, there's a proposed wording in the chat that says that every new feature or enhancement or release has an approved business case with sign off of the platform team leadership, which I think softens some of the overhead that we're talking about, but maybe not all. Like there's still sign off there that like may or may not be, and like who is leadership and those things. But I think it moves us in that. I think it's aligning. We're all coming together and trying to figure out that like how do you acknowledge a need for confidence and clarity and thought behind the work that you do without combining an attribution of process to that, right? Like, and that's a difficult thing to do, right? Because we all have in our heads, oh, well, like that equals this process in my experience, and so we have to try and generalize it.
Actually, I suggest to remove this part because here at Level, for instance, we prefer to working with hypotheses. So we run DevX surveys and identify needs, and we create hypotheses to solve the problems that the developers are facing. So we build the capability platform, run. If it works well with a few teams, so we scale. So it's about how you operate. Yeah, I mean, there are like big companies that need sign-offs and very lots of red tapes, but I mean, it depends on the context.
It depends on the org, because I come from a big org and we don't need that sign off, right? What we need is the product managers and the platform, the product owners agreeing that that's going to add value and it's in the value stream alignment, so it's worth doing. So we just need to reword it around that, I think, rather than talking about sign-offs, because there are different ways of different orgs getting things ultimately into a backlog and a team working on it, which is to Abby's point is about the outcomes rather than the process. I think, Abby, you said we're going to apply that thought across everything, right? It's outcome rather than process.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I think like it's not to dismiss the quality of these conversations, but it's the need to sort of take the overarching themes with the details that we're talking about here and pull them together into like a draft that has like a coherence and like a consistency to it, and that's where that kind of stuff will happen. So yeah.
So 13 we're going to skip over because that was one of the ones that was just getting merged. We've only got 6 minutes left. So question 14 was really about a release process and stages, like private, preview, public, GA.
This could actually also kind of be combined with the overall communication and all. But again, all of this boils down to the fact that are they treating the platform as a product, right? I mean, if we can have a question that kind of the answer is, okay, the highest maturity is the platform as a product, then you release your product in different stages, right? You don't release your most mature product, you release a MVP, then you release something a little bit more serious. So basically something along that line is what we need to get out of this question.
Yeah, okay. 15 then, if we're going to jump on quickly. How does the platform team handle retirement of capabilities? So that was an interesting question last week. It did pose some debate. I think we touched on it towards the end. There are platforms out there where they've never got rid of capability. So it is valid to kind of think, if you're never getting rid of something, you're never deprecating something, then you're not really mature, right? And to be honest, it's taken a while for AWS to even deprecate services. They've only just done it.
But once they got that muscle working, man, they really went for it.
Oh, and of course, Corbyn's left when I said my line. I've been waiting all day.
If you lay off everyone, then you kind of start to realize what you need to get rid of.
Yeah. Oh dear. I was hoping Corbyn was still on when I said that. Never mind. We need to throw that at him the next time. No, but I think none of us would say they weren't a mature org and a good example, right? But they haven't really got rid of services, whereas Google has very more aggressively got rid of services quickly. And
we hate them forever for killing Google Reader.
are you still going on about Reader? That's the one everyone
I
goes,
occasionally type it in mistakenly.
yeah. I use Feedly of all things because I got my Mac Mini yesterday, and the first thing that loaded on my very fresh Mac, for whatever reason, when I set it all up, Feedly pane was the first one that came up. Go figure, right? I no idea.
I was not paying enough attention to understand that Scottish clearly. Uh,
Oh, sorry,
I
You
did
got a
not
new
get that
computer, and the
lesson.
very first thing was Feedly that showed up.
Abby, look, lovely. One of
So
those.
pretty, Chris.
They are so good. I've got a working machine now.
So
Here
just
also,
I didn't call us out at the 10-minute because I think that we can close out operations today. I think we're gonna get there. How do people
Yeah.
feel like let's get our last couple in, and then we'll just get somebody to announce we are successfully moving on to measurement from the next week. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think 15 and 16 were the two questions because 17 was getting merged, if I remember.
Mhm.
So, and
to
the
be very
questions
fair,
feel about
so
this.
Chris, just one thing is that even 15, to be very fair, again, as I said, right, I mean, if we could have a question that says, right, okay, are you treating your platform as a product? Then as part of the product lifecycle methodology, which is published by the Product Management Institute as well, you have to, I mean, there is that part about retiring that product. So if, again, that is my question I had, is that do we intentionally write more questions on this sort of things, right? Okay, are you doing this? Which is basically, again, an enforcement of all of the product management practices that, okay, are you doing, or is it like we have a generic question like, guys, are you treating your platform as a product or not? Which if they say yes, we kind of feel that, okay, then they must be decommissioning it, they must be retiring it, they must have a backlog. So
We're trying to tease that. We're trying to tease that out from them, though. I was okay with the question because the question makes sense to me, and it is trying to find where you're at in your maturity, right? Is it something you do, something you've never done before, something you haven't even thought about? It's worthwhile, I think, teasing that answer out from them. And 16 on how you handle day two, there are no answers there, but that is absolutely one of the ones that we are really trying to get, right? Is how do you deal with day two? And it is related to the questions above about how do you deal with upgrades. So the two of those ones are related as well.
And I think my personal opinion on that is like, we are not trying to catch people. We are not working under the assumption that people are trying to like do things in a sneaky way. Like they're trying to get a good sense of where they are on the model. Like they are genuinely coming to this to like be productive and find things. So what we have to think about as we're doing these things is identify where we think people may not have the clarity to answer the question. So if we believe that the community at large, like the world of platform engineers in the industry, have a hard time with the concept of what a platform product is, we may not choose to generically use that word. If we think that like, because we think, oh, actually people like really define that in different ways, right? And that's I think one of those things that we can refine down as we get towards the end of questions, right? Hey, this one question we're reading, in this group of diverse humans, but that are all deeply engaged in platform engineering, we're all reading it in different ways. That tells us this isn't a fair word to lean on, a fair like summary to lean on. We need to break this down into a few other subcomponent parts, right?
Only thing, Abhi, then is that I completely agree, right? But then I think we might even have some more questions also in the same sort of breadth, right? Because that again, that's what we have to think, right? I mean, how do we balance, right? I mean, do we keep a lot of questions? For example, I can add another 50 questions on how to treat the platform as a product, right? I mean, okay, are you doing this? Are you doing that? Rather than asking, like you said, then we have to take a, well, maybe we keep just the most important things, like Chris said, the decommissioning is an important one. Maybe having a backlog is an important one. Maybe having a way to ensure that they are having something like ensuring there is business value is an important one. Something along those lines. Maybe
and
we just keep
and I think this is going to be the balance. This is going to be the hardest part. And like, look, we aren't over the last hump yet to make this thing successful, because like it may like all this stuff, like the output of it may end up being that an assessment isn't the right tool, that it's something else that we can put out. But like all this work can result in something really powerful for people. We're hoping it's some sort of an assessment people can run through. But one of the working criteria that we had, just like we had outcomes over tactics, we also had keeping it short and sweet. And so if it turns out we can't do an assessment that we're proud of, that we feel like is genuinely going to support the community in less than 100 questions, then like we have to think about, what does that mean? Should we be revisiting the short and sweet requirement, or should we be revisiting this as an assessment tool? You know,
Sure.
like, or and there maybe there's something else that we can do to use that information to give people value. And so this is the stuff that's really hard for me to tell you, like, like it's going to be possible or it's not, until we take all of this sort of input, distill it into something, and see what comes out the other side, and then like test it on the group. So
And,
yeah.
and I think that's the key, Abby, right? You said before, it'll all come out in the wash when this goes out for review. We'll get that feedback during the review that
Exactly.
you don't have enough questions or you've got too many.
Yep.
It needs to be of value and usable for people, and
Yep.
to help guide them on what we think best practice really looks like.
And valuable and useful is like, what does that mean? Like, and usable, like, is usable, if it's valuable enough, are people willing to go through 50 questions? Or is it, as soon as you get over 20, it doesn't matter how good the questions are or how good the output is, nobody's going to do it? Or, you know, like, those are the things that we don't know. And that, to your point, Chris, like, we're going to have to wait and see, like, what's drop off if we put this in a forum or something, right? Like,
Yeah.
but
people need to be able to recognize themselves using the survey as well, right? If they don't recognize themselves using any of the 4 answers, and everyone is hitting 5 other because we've put that in there initially to capture, we've got it wrong.
Exactly. That's a good way of getting some data back on the early submission. So
yeah. Right,
cool.
we're over time.
We are. Who wants to send an update? Everyone's sort of dropped off. I can do one. I'll do one. I haven't done one in a while. Unless Chris, you're up for it.
I can't talk and type at the same time and take notes. Come on.
You don't have to talk and type. It's after the talking. The update comes
I'm
in
a man,
after
right?
the talking, Chris.
I can't pat my head and rub my belly at the same time.
I have successfully offloaded the responsibility for enough weeks in a row. I'm happy to take a turn. So yeah, so I'll send an update later with the video, and that we're moving on to measurement. So I guess the call to action for those that are left is add some questions into measurement so we can have similar sets of conversations there for next week. So, and the second call to action is, remember that after next week, we're hopefully going to go back to interfaces. So be thinking about why that was such a hard challenge, what we can do to try and make interfaces a bit easier to tackle, would be like the secondary ask. So
we probably need to carve a wee bit of time out next week just to talk about that then towards the end. Yeah.
Possibly. Or we push out, you know, or we need 2 weeks on that. Like, look, we're going to do what we need to do. I'm just trying to put us on a sort of a schedule so that we can make progress and go to the next step. So, but you know, it's no point in doing all this work if we rush the end. So, if we need the second week, we'll take it. Cool. Well, thank you all for, like, slogging through. David had 3 hours. I had 2 hours of CNCF stuff. Like, it's been long days. Thank you all for coming. And I will see you all next week at this time.
See you all next week.
Bye, everyone. Have a good
Cheers,
week.
Sam. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.